everyone, and welcome. I am Susan Smith, and you are in my studio, Stitched by Susan, for another episode of Live and Unscripted. What, you ask, is Live and Unscripted? Well, it is me live streaming quilting from my studio, real time. No edits, no prettying it up, just the real thing. Today's project is a vintage red and white quilt top, and we're now making it into a quilt for my friend Pris. So I've been emailing if you're on my newsletter about it this week, and I've shown a few quick clips on various reels and shorts because I have already started the quilt. Sometimes in these live and unscripted episodes, they're from loading to finish. But when I'm working on a custom project, it's too long to do it in one sitting. And so I've already got it loaded and I'm well underway. I wanted to be able to highlight the different specific areas. So things we'll be looking at today, I'll be talking about dealing with a vintage top, first off, that is pretty much never flat or square or accurate piecing or pressing, and what I did with that, how I loaded it and used and left extra room for rulers. Then we'll be quilting a piano key border, including going around a corner, so you can see how I do that. We'll be quilting the motif that's in the red stars on this quilt, and we'll be quilting a background fill. So this way you get little snippets of all the bits that are in this quilt without having to watch an interminable length of time. So we will probably still be 2 hours. That's fairly typical for live and unscripted. And as always, especially if you're new here, know that I encourage this to be a social time. So feel free to type in questions for me. Precede them with a QQ if you would, so we can find them. But also feel free to chat amongst yourself. Chat about vintage projects that you've worked on and the various challenges that you found. Chat about what you're working on today in your studio. Tell corny jokes, like whatever. This is intended to be a social time. So as I'm working, because it is custom quilting, I do have to concentrate a little more than I sometimes do. Sometimes my quilting is, very repetitive and kind of mindless, and I can chatter while I work. Today, at least in the early parts, I'll be a little more focused on the quilting. So talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll pause from time to time for us to chat. So type in your questions and we'll pop them on the screen and I'll answer them as best I can. Type in your suggestions and comments, and we'll just have a good old-fashioned sort of quilting bee together. Okay, I'm going to begin, I think, by showing you a couple of... Actually, just give me 1 second here to ask Dave for something. Dave, could you move the left-hand paper onto the other side of the screen, my show flow, because I literally can't read it because of this light. Sorry, you guys. Yeah, that one. You can't see this, but if you watched our show on Behind the Scenes, you'd know what this is all about. We have a frame on the ceiling on which the lights and cameras are hanging. And I also hang what I call the show flow, notes for myself to remember the things that I want to say. And one of them was totally obscured by a light. And so that was not very useful to me. So now we've got it moved.
I have to add this comment even though it's not a Q&A.
Okay, here comes a comment. Apparently it's cute.
That's the wrong one.
Oh, Cindy, she's hauling grain. Good to know, Cindy. Ruth, how do you look so young and beautiful? I don't know. Do a lot of quilting. This is what I'm saying, Keeps you young. And speaking of Ruth, you guys can't see this from your end, but we have our friend Ruth, who's a teenager, sitting here in the studio. She's kind of apprenticing under Mr. Producer. And one of these days, there's going to come a day when he can't be here. And Ruth will be my Miss Producer. So, huge round of applause for Ruth because she's helping us out today. We so appreciate it. Okay, on to the quilt. Let me put my coffee cup down and you can load up the first picture, Dave, and we'll have a chat about this quilt. Okay, photo 1. So this is the quilt I'm working on, laying on one of my studio room floors. And you can see on the right the level of ruffling. Notice too that all of the blocks are set on point and all of the exterior edges are bias. So not only was that border semi-ruffled on, but the bias edge was stretched also. Huge, huge amount of ruffling going on. So I'm going to show you actually what I trimmed off of the quilt because it's quite remarkable. Okay, Dave, you want to put me on screen again for a sec? So what I did is I took 2 of those borders off on 2 opposing... No, me on the screen, hon. 2 of those borders, so the opposing sides, and this is what I trimmed off one of them, and this is what I trimmed off the other. So it's a 72-inch square quilt. So fully 10% I took off. And then if you would put the second photo up, Dave, I'll give you something that is a tip for anyone putting borders on any quilt. The way I measured what the length of that border should be is kind of in the central area of the quilt. And I did it very casually. I just laid my border piece, it was pressed nice and flat now, laid it along the quilt. You can't see at the very top edge, but I lined those edges up and gauged how much excess there was and trimmed it off. And then I went over to the edge of the quilt and pinned it on and made the quilt fit. So at this point, the quilt had been quite stretched, that bias edge. So I did press it and steam it a little bit to try and coax it smaller. And then I made it fit my border, which I knew now was the same size as a central measurement on my quilt. Does that make sense? So this is true even when you're putting on borders on a quilt that you're making. It's a great way to not have too long or too short of borders, is literally measure them against the center of the quilt so that your sides and your middle then measure the same. Okay, we can be done with the pictures.
So I have to throw another chat in.
Okay, here comes another chat. Bobbin with Brittany, my first long arm commission was from my aunt with an early 1900s top. She thought a stain was a mouse probably died on it. Oy. So one of the reels that I posted this week was a picture of kind of my first pass on the quilt, and some of the stains are still quite evident. This particular quilt, as many vintage ones are, has been handled over the years, moved, refolded, etc., and is really badly frayed on the back. And what was that all about?
I'll tell you later.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe you guys know. Anyway, badly frayed. And so Pris made the choice to not wash it first. I'm quilting it first. So my little reel was, do you pre-wash before you quilt it, or do you wash the quilt after? And somebody chimed in, Tracy Lucoda, whom I know personally, chimed in and said, I could not stand to quilt one that hadn't been washed, thinking of what's in it. So then I said to her, gosh, I'm itchy quilting this one now, thinking of what might be in it, because this one does have quite a few stains on it. And we opted not to wash it until after it's quilted. So fingers crossed. That's been my choice generally in the past, because they're often so fragile that I feel like even a soak, like I'm not talking a wring or, a washing machine. I'm just even a soak and a wring, I feel like is too much. And so I've chosen to quilt first, wash after. Who knows? Anyway, let's get into it, but I do want to show you guys, and there's not a good place to put this, but I do want to show it off a little bit because Austin is here. I want to show you guys something. Okay, I got Happy Mail this week. Look at this. I'll twist it a little bit. It's always hard to get it right side up for the camera. This is my logo, which you probably see in the upper corner of the screen whenever you're watching. Austin, who's here today live, quilted this for me. Basically, it's a little mug rug that I can set my mug and my little goodie on. And he also made a wall hanging, which is a larger version of this. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Austin. I love it. Okay, let's get on to our quilt. I think, Dave, we should have the big view camera, and I'll show you guys what I've done. One thing I should mention too here. You guys know YouTube is always free, right? And I welcome you, and I am free to share my tips and topics projects that I'm working on and so forth. However, if you do wish to support the show, there's a couple of ways you can do it. A one-time way is to use YouTube's Super Chat. So whether you're on a desktop or whether you're on your phone or smaller device, right below the chat, there's a little dollar sign. And you can, if you wish, make a contribution one time there. And another way, and I'll be talking about it a few times today, would be in my monthly membership, where it is a subscription, so it is every month. It's $12.97, but you receive several lessons every month and some actual content. And so those are two ways that if you wish to support this channel that you can. Again, if you have a moment and are interested, take a look at a recent episode we did that was behind the scenes of our studio, and you'll kind of see where I reinvest those dollars and where over the years we've grown in terms of lighting, cameras, etc. It is a bit of a production. We estimate that it takes about 8 to 10 hours to put on one of these 2-hour shows. So there is work involved, and I appreciate so much how many of you support and how many of you show up live and just contribute with your presence. We love having you here. Okay.
If they do donate, you'll see what I had on a second ago.
Oh yeah, Mr. Producer says those who do contribute, You'll get a nice little flashing star fireworks. So there's that bonus too, if you've always wanted to sort of see your name in lights. Will names be on it?
No,
Oh, sorry, names don't get. You just get a thank you. Mr. Producer says that will be coming. Okay, let's get on to our quilt, you guys. Let's have the side view camera, okay, Dave? And we'll have a look at what I've done. And we'll talk about how I got there. So this is the really big view. We could focus that in a little bit, Dave, because that's very far away to even see what the quilting is. It's just not terribly clear. Maybe you can see it on your screen. I can't on mine. Anyway, let's talk about it big picture first, and you'll get some close-ups of the quilting in a moment. My two sides that I took the borders off and fit them properly, I put on the right and the left. And my two that were still fairly roughly, I left on the top and the bottom because I thought that fullness would be easier to manage if I'm looking at the whole thing, right? I'm not working with it piece by piece by piece as I'm advancing. So that was my thought process there. And then also I chose this piano keyboarder, which is one that I love and you see me using often. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is it frames any quilt beautifully. Just having these solid lines, and I have a kind of mitered corner, always frames any quilt beautifully. But in this case, it has the added benefit of being really good at taking up excess fabric. I can easily nudge a bit of extra between these lines. They're spaced 3/4 of an inch apart. And so I was able to fit in all of that excess. There's a couple that are a bit puffy, but there's no actual pleats. So that's what I did around the quilt as a whole. Also, when I loaded it, and unfortunately you're not able to see this on camera, but in other episodes, perhaps you've seen it. I have a leveler bar along the back of my machine, which the quilt feeds under, and I have a long armor's measuring tape permanently attached to that. So I can look at my measurement on the right and my measurement on the left. So I mentioned this quilt is 72 inches square. So I used the 27-inch marking on the right, the 45-inch marking on the left, and every time I advance my quilt, I can gauge that. I can stand and look at that line and make sure that my quilt is staying the same width all the way down. That's important with this quilt because, again, this entire perimeter, like inside the border, was on the bias, and everything is on point. So you literally can stretch this quilt like crazy. But also you can nudge it if needed, right? So I could set my sides at that 72-inch mark and do whatever I needed to do to get it to fit within. So when it's all said and done, I will have a very nice and square quilt for Pris. I think that's all I was going to say about that. Some of the things you may be able to see in seeing this big picture view is the unevenness of the quilt. So it was all hand pieced, and the stars, lots of them are like missing points, and they're not parallel, I guess, these lines. You know, they get wider, thinner, etc. And if you look down the quilt, you'll see they kind of wave a little bit. There's lots of irregularities. I say that to say, when you're working with a vintage quilt top that is hand pieced, right off the bat, you need to set reasonable expectations for the kind of result you're going to get at the end. Reasonable meaning you're not going to be able to line up every seam line, right? You're going to have to make adjustments and sometimes accept less than perfect. I chose to stitch in the ditch around all these stars. Probably 25% of their points were missing, sometimes half an inch of the point, right? Not just a couple threads. So I have to set expectations for that's not going to look perfect, and also make decisions. Am I going to actually stitch in the ditch around the red or make a star point? I chose to make a star point so that on the back side of the quilt you see stars with points. And then I echoed that 1/4 inch outside of that, so it made a better looking echo too, right? So just thinking through a few of those things and being realistic about what you've got to work with helps. In some cases, there were actual pleats in the piecing. Therefore, there are going to be a few actual pleats in my quilted areas, particularly in the background. That's a reasonable expectation for this quilt. So just know that when you're getting into it. Here you're seeing, perhaps you can see on this camera some of the stains. You'll certainly see them as we're doing close-ups and working. Okay, I think that covers all of that pretty good. Let me see if there's anything else I need to talk about. It says top and bottom, divide and conquer. No, I think that's good. I'm going to roll now to where I was working on the quilt, and I think we'll go right to the bottom and work on that piano key border so you can see what I do with that. And while I'm rolling, I will tell you some of my equipment. I work on a Bernina Q24, which means it's 24 inches from needle to back of the machine, which gives me, in effect, about 19 or 20 working inches. I am using 100% polyester thread today. Some of it is isocord and some of it is glide, and I'll tell you why as we get going. I made some of those choices. Whew, here we are at the bottom. So before I start quilting, I'm going to give you some of the blow-by-blow of how I worked my way down the quilt. I want to, Pris asked me to stitch within the stars with red thread. But also, as you can see, there's a cream colored, it's kind of a mottled backing, and she didn't particularly want there to be red thread on the backing. So we talked about, again, reasonable expectations. I said I was quite willing to put red on the top and kind of a deep, almost tan on the back if she acknowledged that there was the very real possibility that some bits of red are going to show through the needle holes. And in fact, they do. And in fact, Pris is fine with that, right? So that was the expectation, and that's exactly what we got. But the pretty result is we now have red stitching on the front, and we're fine with the tan on the back. So that was one thing. So as I was working through this quilt, I did what I call faux basting. So typically, if you were working on a custom quilt and you wanted to be able to roll back and forth and maybe change thread colors or do all of the motifs first and all of the background last, if you want to roll back and forth, you have to vigorously baste every 6-8 inches, depending. When you've got a biasy, juggly quilt like this one, probably every 6 inches all the way down the quilt, right? So you baste the sides, you baste a line across, you baste another line across, and another. That's typically what you would do. My idea of faux basting is I started at the top, and in every row, I stabilized the outside, and then I went around each star. So I'm going to do that part for you, but outlining each star acted as my basting. You can see how close they are, right? And so then I did not need to do the basting. In fact, I could just outline the star, then advance my quilt and start on the next row, stabilize the edges, maybe do that piano key border, and then outline each star again. And that stabilizing I repeated till I got all the way to the bottom of the quilt. So we can either do piano key or outline stars. I think we'll outline stars. Yes. Do we want to go into some questions? Oh, awesome. We've got a supporter. I know something else I want to mention, Dave. Could we zoom out quickly on the side camera? Because I'm going to show you guys a magic trick. I want to see this edge way down here as best as we can. Look at that. You're going to get to see most of it. Okay, look what I've got happening here. This big sag of material and this rumpliness happening on my roller. The reason for that is this huge expanse, which is 20 inches anyways, of backing is wider than my quilt, and there's no batting in it, right? So as I've rolled up my quilt, this is much looser. There's a quick fix for this. It's hard to quilt if this is sagging. So what I do is I grab at this side, you can almost see me, the very, very top layer, and I pull it until it's snug down here, right? Pull it, wrap it around that roller, and just use my fingers to stuff it up in under the roller. And presto, I have a nicely held backing. So we're going to put our side clamps on. Now I'm running down to the left because I actually, oops, I moved the camera. Sorry about that. I actually need my ruler plate on. Let me show you guys. You can do the, there you go. This is my ruler plate. We are going to be using a ruler to go around the stars and to do the echo around them and then to do the piano key border. So we'll do all the ruler work. If you've not worked with a ruler before at a long arm, this is an essential piece. Every long arm brand has their own kind of shape and size, but this little plate snaps onto the nose of your long arm machine, allowing you to rest a ruler nicely on that working area. Difficult, maybe even impossible to work with a ruler just on a long arm plane because the ruler wobbles and you risk a wobbly line and you risk catching the ruler under the machine as well. Let me just get this plate on, and then Mr. Producer's telling me we have lots of questions or a few questions. We'll chat for a little bit. Okay, that's on. All right, let's have some questions. Do you want to put me on the camera again? Frida, thank you so much, Frida. These live and unscripted shows are like visiting with friends. I've learned so much from them. Good. That is absolutely my intention. Do you want to put me on the camera, Dave? Oh, he's trying. He's trying. Yeah, it happens. That is certainly my intention, that basically you feel like you've just come into my studio and worked alongside me and glean whatever you can from it. It's not a lesson, but hopefully really helpful. Catherine, have you ever quilted a top that has prairie points on the edge? Yes, I have. I've done several of them actually. Do you have a specific question about that? And if so, I can try to answer it. I do not quilt them down, I can tell you that. How did you work with it? I've done some that had them on the outer edge, and I've done some that had them like against a border. And in the case of the border ones, I sort of pinned them back and did whatever quilting I needed to do under them and then let them fall back in place and did the rest of the quilting. Have I done them on the very outer edge? I don't know that I've done them on the outer edge, because if people want that, I would always recommend to them that they do that after it's been quilted to then sew them on as part of the binding process. That's all that comes to mind right now. Catherine, good question though. Are there more? Yes. Here we go. Janice, I have a red and white quilt that I did not pre-wash, hoping I don't get pink background. You know, people watching might have some good tips for that. I've not sewn a lot of quilts that are red and white, but I know there are things like color catchers, things like washing in a vinegar solution or a salt solution can help to set that color. I do know that once upon a time, quite a few years ago, long before I was long arming, I made a red and white quilt for our daughter for a wedding gift. And the first time she washed it, terrible pink background. And I used Vicki Walsh's method of hot water and Dawn dish detergent in a bathtub, and all that pink cleared out. So whether it happens to you or not, there are fixes for it to try and prevent it and fixes for it if it happens. I had really good results with that detergent. Now, of course, when you're dealing with a vintage top, you've got older inks and other things come into play. I can't say I'm a super duper expert on that. That's what I know. More questions?
Oh, yeah. I'm doing three things at once.
Leanne, I think Jamie Wallen will put bleached muslin under a vintage top before quilting it. What are your thoughts on this? I think that's a great solution if you've got a quilt that is super, super, super thin. This one might have benefited from that, honestly. Or if you've got a quilt that perhaps has some holes in it and there's not a reasonable way of fixing them, you can still quilt it and give it a life, maybe not as long a life, but maybe many good years of life by putting a lightweight muslin literally interlining the quilt. I think that's a fine solution. You'll see as I quilt this one, there's red seam allowances that show through, and I can't help that, and muslin wouldn't help it. Diane, I'm working on a quilt top that's been around for a bit. Rusty brown stains I don't think will come out. I'm thinking about quilting it with a matching thread and meandering. Certainly an option. I definitely am a believer in, if you've got a super fragile top or a multicolored top or one that for whatever reason you don't want to invest a ton of time in, I think that an edge-to-edge design is actually a great solution. Again, you're giving that quilt life, you're finishing it, you're using it or giving it away. So if edge-to-edge is what it takes, do it. I have quilted several vintage tops edge-to-edge because I think custom quilting can be hard on them. If you're quilting along seam lines or having multiple points converging, that can actually be hard on fragile fabric. So sometimes that edge-to-edge quilting just literally holds the thing together. I personally am not a huge fan of big meandering, but that's just my personal taste. I think there are other sort of prettier things you can do. The rusty spots. I wanted to mention, and I think I forgot to put this in the description. I'll try and go back and add it later today. I use a product called Retro Soak. There's one called Retro Wash too, but I've used Retro Soak, and it's been very good at not only taking out the rusty dark stains, which are super common, but at also lightening and brightening all the fabrics, colors included. So that's been a great thing for me. You can buy it on Amazon, and it is expensive, but it only takes a couple tablespoons for a bucket, and you'll get lots of quilts worth out of a $15 packet. So it's a cool product. Retro Soak. Mr. Producer's looking for it, by the way. He'll give you guys a link. Do you want to give me another question? Look for Retro Wash if you're not seeing it, and maybe they've rebranded or something. I don't know. Angel, what color did you choose for the backing? You'll be able to see it as we get quilting, Angel, and get into some different camera views. It's a mottled cream, a little deeper than the front. It's got some richer tan tones in it. Yeah. Marja, why is your back fabric so much bigger than the quilt? Because my friend Pris, who purchased it, got 108-inch wide fabric, and she wanted to be sure she had enough. So I've got the selvages on the top and bottom of my rails, and there was just excess hanging on at the end. It's my personal choice not to trim that down to size because now she's got a chunk of fabric on the end afterwards, right? The biggest possible chunk to use. And it's not a big deal to me to deal with that little bit of excess. So I choose to just leave it on and trim it off in one fell swoop. Mr. Producer's doing 100 things at once, including looking for retro soak. Rianne, when you have vintage quilt tops, does it take value away when you repair and quilt them? Rianne, I don't know. Dave, you've got me on a close-up camera view. I don't know that I can give you good information on that. I am not a trained textile person. I would imagine that yes, much like refinishing a piece of furniture, right, takes away its original quality, I would imagine that repairing or replacing borders and certainly replacing fabrics takes away from the vintage value. But in my case, the quilts that I work on, I'm not trying to keep an heirloom. I'm just trying to finish someone's quilt that they started umpteen years ago and give it a new lease on life. So for my purposes, I do what needs doing to give it that life. Does that make sense? So that's the answer that I have. Catherine, they sent me the quilt top with the prairie points on the edge of the quilt. This is referring back to an earlier conversation. That's a tricky one, Catherine, because how are you going to attach it onto your long arm? You know, are you going to pin it beyond your leader at the top and bottom? That's going to be really difficult. And to quilt to the edge, I feel like is going to be almost impossible. So I think you ought to think that through and decide if that can be done or if it literally would save time and headache to take that, to undo that seam and maybe ask the client. I'm not going to give you full instructions on that, but talk to your client because you might get a better end result by literally taking them off and putting them on later. Maybe she doesn't understand what the loading process on long arm rails is and the fact that you need side clamps and so forth. Almost impossible to do that to the edge and neatly with prairie points, in my opinion. Okay, more questions? There we go. Rianne. We had this one already. Laura, this is the first time catching you live. I'm learning so much by watching your videos, yet I stand intimidated in front of the quilt that I loaded on my long arm. Still very new to this, and there's more parts. Or another one like it. We can answer together. Lori, just ordered my first long arm, should be here next week. What would you suggest be my first thing to try and quilt? I have a little bit of experience in free motion. Gosh, for both of you, ultimately, my advice is going to be don't be scared of your machine. Just play with it and try it. Second to that is probably try it with things that aren't uber precious to you. It might just be an ugly yard of fabric off your stash, right? Or it might be something that you're willing to have for a dog bed. You know, and from there you might go into, you know, baby quilts that are small or comfort quilts that are not for sort of discriminating recipients. They just want things quilted. So work on things that don't intimidate you, that you're not fearful about having imperfections on. And I would start quilting with something that is loopy and curving. It might be a meander. It might be loops. I personally think loops are a lot easier than a meander because you're not always changing direction. You're just continuing around in curves. So those are some ways to start. I will put a tiny plug in here. I have a small course called Machine Quilting for Beginners that's intended for folks like you that talks about batting choices and needle choices and how to assess, you know, the wonkiness or the squareness or the flatness of your quilt top and how big the backing should be, and several different ways to load for the long arm and several different ways to baste for the sit-down machine. ways to stop and start your stitching and anchor it. Lots and lots of beginner type topics are in that. So that is always linked in the description below my videos. It's called Machine Quilting for Beginners. So it's not so much about quilting designs as about the brass tacks, the knowledge that you need to make some of those decisions for beginning quilts. Don't be scared of your machine. Just dive in and play with it and get to know it and get familiar with it. And that takes quilts, not just one quilt. That might take 10 or 15 or 20 quilts before you get comfortable with it. And that's okay. It's part of the process. Okay, we better get quilting, you guys. I've been talking for a long, long time. One more thing I want to say as I get my ruler and get ready to start quilting. Thinking back to this idea I was expressing about faux basting, right? Thinking of my quilting is going to stabilize my areas of the quilt. And this one is quite wonky and wobbly and excess in it, right? So what I'm not going to do is start with this star on the far right and do every star across to the far left and hope that all comes good at the end. What I'm going to do instead is divide and conquer. So I'm going to do a star that's in the middle, and then I'll do these two in whatever order, and I'll do another star in the middle. Do you see what I'm saying? So that my excess is being gradually chopped up into smaller spaces. And by the time it's all said and done, I'm pretty confident I won't have any wrinkles in my quilt. So let's start with this one right in the middle. I've got my ruler plate on underneath. You can kind of see that, this little mini table. I've got my ruler foot on, which has, we're going to see the close-up here in a sec. There we are. Has the deeper profile, right, that a ruler will not go under or over. And then I've got my ruler, which I will show you right here. Can we even see that? There we go. The Mystical Ditcher by Quilter's Apothecary. My favorite straight edge ruler. And I do have a link for those. The code is SBS 10. I think it's in the description, Dave, if you want to look there. I keep it always in my video descriptions because lots of people ask about this ruler. Jamie Wallen he's a wonderful, experienced quilter, and he has a collection of these rulers, which he's named for me. It's a collection of straight rulers called the SBS collection. An SBS 10 or 15? Now I can't remember. We'll get you a discount. SBS 10. There you go. On any ruler from that collection. Okay. And I love the handle. You'll see how I can hold on to it in different ways. That's what I love about it. So we are now going to stitch around the ruler. On my Bernina, I've got BSR 2 on, which means that when I stop moving the machine like so, it stops stitching completely. However, I usually click it off, or often I click it off to move my ruler just to be on the safe side so that it doesn't start stitching if I bump it. You'll see as I do a few more stars, I'll get more comfortable, and I'll do that less and less, and I'll just keep moving my ruler and going on. So here's an example of a point that does not exist on the star, but I'm going ahead and quilting in the point as though it did exist. Because my thread matches my quilt top, you're not really going to notice it massively on the front, and it makes a nice star shape on the back. And of course, I'm going to echo around this stitching a 1/4 inch further out. And if I were to echo that funny corner, it would look even funnier. You know, I don't want to emphasize or magnify that. I talked earlier about setting realistic expectations. This is a great example. None of these lines, or few of them, are straight. And so I'm not worrying too much about being exactly in the ditch. I'm just trying to stay on the cream side. It's really my only goal. Mr. Producer is going to put some nice music on for you while I do these stars. And I'm just going to heads down, get some quilting done. That's one. We'll come down here and do these two before we go and divide and conquer at the other end. Again, thinking of reasonable expectations for this particular quilt. If I was doing this on a well-pieced quilt that was maybe going to hang in shows or something like that, I would have pre-marked this echo line with a marking pen. It would be much more accurately spaced, and these points would be in exactly the right place if I pre-marked it. But because I'm already dealing with so much irregularity, and also to keep time managed, I'm choosing not to. I am literally eyeballing how far to extend here, you know, to get that even echo line. And it is not perfect by any means. But since nothing about this quilt is, I feel like that's a reasonable expectation. The effect of an echoed line is definitely still there. It does frame the stars so nicely to have that added echo, as opposed to just doing my fill right up to the edge of the red with only this one line. That's just something I've learned from experience and from looking at other people's quilts. Early on, I made that determination. I don't love to just outline something. I like to do an additional echo. It really frames the thing, whatever the thing is. think I mentioned my threads earlier, but I'll do it again. I've got Isacord 40 weight 100% poly loaded in my bobbins. I'm pre-winding my bobbins, and I did them in a tan that's a couple shades lighter than darker than this muslin and darker than the bulk of the background, but there's a kind of swirly design on the background in that deeper tan. And then my top thread right now is a Glide 60 weight, which is a little finer. And the color is linen. It's the closest match I had to this muslin. And I chose the Glide 60 weight because you'll see when I get into... Oops, I'm going to get a pleat there, and I don't like that. Hang on. I'm going to redo that line a little bit. I pushed the red in place out of the way there. When I get to doing the back fill, you'll see it's quite closely spaced, and I thought the lighter thread would look a little lighter in that fill. And also, when I initially started, I had a different idea for fill, even fuller and busier. So we'll talk about that more when we get to quilting the fill. And I'm just going to back up right to where that seam allowance is and do my splice right there. So that anchors my thread well. And I'll just kind of zhuzh my fabric into place there where it ought to be. There is fullness in all kinds of places. The goal is to kind of distribute it. And again, you'll see when I get to my fill how I take up all of this excess. But for now, I'm just kind of shoving it out into that white area and trying to keep the red as smooth as I can. We'll see if I can do it. Yay, no pleat. I certainly could have used a pre-wound bobbin in the bottom with an 80 weight thread on it. However, the only cream that I had was very, very pale, and I chose not to do that. The reason I went with the deeper tan a little bit is because, again, having talked over with Pris that she really wanted the red thread on the stars on the front, then I wanted to have a deeper color on the back that's less high contrast with the red, if that makes sense. I want that to... My goal was to not have that showing through the red on the front side. And in fact, it doesn't. I kept my tension, honestly, erring toward it showing a little bit on the back. The red does show a little on the back in every needle hole, but the cream does not show through on the front. So I felt like that was the right way to err. And again, consulted with Chris. She was happy with that, and so that's the way I went with it. And I might as well insert here, if it had been me doing my quilt, I probably would have done red top and bottom for the stars, because I think I would have kind of liked that red motif on the back, but that just comes down to taste, and I'm totally willing to acknowledge that. If Pris's taste is she doesn't want a red thing quilted on the back, then that's great. I will do my level best, but where I think it's not going to be perfect, as I thought here, I'm clear about that, and then she can make a decision, and on we go. This, by the way, is my last row of stars. I actually made really good progress on this quilt yesterday. Enough that I think I'll finish it today. Not while we're live, I don't think, but I do think I will finish it today. I am going to go ahead and finish all these stars before we do the piano key border, because after that, I will then change to red thread on the top and show you what I did inside the stars. So I want to go ahead and get all of this done so I don't have to flip-flop back to it. And also after the piano keys, I will take my ruler plate off. I've been asked quite a few times, is there any reason you can't just keep quilting your daily regular quilting with the ruler plate on? And there is no reason particularly except that the ruler plate does shorten up the amount of space you have, movability. There's several inches of quilting space that you lose at the front edge of your machine. So once I get the ruler work finished, then I'm going to take that ruler plate off. So I have my maneuverability back. You can see what I'm saying, right, about the lines that are in no wise near straight. So you might ask yourself, well, why in the world are you using a straight ruler then? Well, simply because it gives me something to kind of brace my hopper foot against. Where if I was just winging it, I probably could follow the line reasonably well, just freehand. But, you know, what if it bumps a little bit out of control? So even whatever ruler I chose to use, I honestly could just about use a curved one in spots. It's not really about the exact shape of the ruler. It's just about having that something that you can kind of rest your hopper foot against. It's like propping your little finger down when you're doing calligraphy, you know, as a kind of guide. A ruler is sometimes like that. Just one more. And I realize I don't even have my edge clamps on down here. Better get that done right now. But you can see we're in good shape here in terms of flatness, right? There is still fluffy areas, but they're pretty well distributed. No one area is significantly fluffier than any other area. So we will be able to take that up with the background fill, I promise. I left a really challenging spot to show you guys. So if you care to place wagers on whether or not I can do it without a pleat, you'll laugh when I show you. It's a pretty roughly spot. There was a very curved one, and you can see I just literally shift my ruler as I go. The goal is just to stay on the cream. And you can see why I love this particular ruler with the handle. It just gives me a myriad of ways that I can grasp it, twist it, turn it, adjust it, and still keep a good grip on it. Okay, that was the last of the stars outlined. Do we have questions coming in or no? Okay, let's have a few comments. And Ruth, would you mind refilling my coffee mug? This one that's right here beside me. I'd be so appreciative. Right there. Coffee. Camera view. There we go. It's looking beautiful, by the way. I sent Pris pictures last night. She was so pleased. Sharon, read the prairie points. Could she baste a border wider than the points, then use that to attach to the leaders and side clamps? Remove when quilting is completed. I think that is a reasonable solution, Sharon. The question begs to be answered, though. Is time saved by attaching that and then having to take it off later? Or by, like, often the prairie points are basted in one long line. Could you just undo that one lap and they would still be, like, attached to each other but not attached to the quilt? So the person doing that is, you know, right there in front of it is the person to decide which is the better way. But yes, do you think that's a reasonable remedy? Teresa, have you used tulle overlaid on a vintage quilt plus a new backing, then stipple over it? I saw a post that used that process for a very damaged quilt to save it. Thanks for all you do. Wash hands. Yeah, I know I shouldn't eat any food after handling this quilt, right? Oh! Okay, I thought you were referring back to my comment about literally feeling itchy, thinking of all the ickies that might be in this quilt. I've not ever laid tooling over top of a quilt, I'll be honest. I feel like that would be scratchy, although it would achieve keeping it in appearance wise. So you're thinking like a quilt, not just a quilt top. So a matter of sort of repairing it. It'd be worth a try. I have not ever done it. So give it a whirl. Let us know. Linda, what stitch length are you using? I have got it on 10 stitches per inch right now, and that's kind of my most common. Kim also, I go longer on vintage fragile fabric. Don't want to perforate the top too much. Absolutely, I see your point in that, Kim. When we get to my background quilting, you'll see that I actually do it even smaller because it's quite fine and tight circles. But I see your point. That is certainly a consideration, not putting too many holes in it. Linda, what do you use to mark an echo line? Typically, I would use a purple air erase marking pen. Yeah, air erase. Yeah. Could use a blue water erase too, but you don't usually need it to last for long. Mary Ellen, so glad to hear that I'm not the only one challenged in getting the tension perfect without a bit of needle thread showing on the back. I try to keep the pop-up on the back too. Ditto. And, you know, usually I can keep them so they're visibly quite neat if the threads are close to matching. But when you have high contrast like red and tan and also thin fabrics, it's hard to not have that show through a bit. One of the other measures we took, which I forgot to mention, was we used a bamboo batting, and it's a 6-ounce bamboo, which is a little bit fluffier than an 80-20. We also talked about the possibility of using 2 layers of batting, which would have helped with those show-throughs of thread, but Pris chose not to because it would have made a quite heavy quilt. And her goal for this quilt is a couch quilt that she can use and love. So keeping that goal in mind, we chose not to do the double bat. Teresa, the whole quilt, only one my daughter-in-law has of her mother's. Then it's worth trying. I mean, you might try the technique on something smaller and less precious to see if you like it, but it seems, to my head, it seems like a viable way to save the quilt so that you can treasure it for that much longer. Yeah. Marja, what is the number of your feet you can slide the thread so easily in it? With my ruler foot, it's not possible. I have a Bernina Q24. I have the ruler foot. It's called a 72S, Teresa. So the S just means it has a slit in it. So it's, Mr. Producer added it in the comments. I personally like that because I love the ease of popping my thread in and out of it. I know other quilters that prefer the one that is a closed hoop because then the thread never slides out of the foot. So that's personal preference. I like the 72S myself. More thoughts are coming. Here they come. Cindy, what's your posture like as you do this? How are you standing? Do you get shoulder or neck stiffness? Oh, Cindy, you ask tough questions. For one, I am standing on a fatigue mat. I have a long one. It's a generous 6 feet long behind my quilting machine, even though I'm standing on carpet because the carpet is on concrete. I am in a walkout basement is where I'm working. So the fatigue mat certainly helps. I definitely take breaks. Like when I'm here on Alive and Unscripted with you guys, that's the longest uninterrupted quilting I kind of ever do. When I'm at home on my own, especially when I get to doing small stuff like the background fill, which we're going to do soon, I'll take breaks even every 15 or 20 minutes, roll my shoulders, go up and down the stairs and do something else, give my eyes a break, all the things. I wouldn't say that I have the world's greatest posture, Cindy. I tend to get closer and closer and closer and closer, hunching in when I'm working, and I keep having to remind myself, like, relax and stand up and loosen up. I can see fine. I don't have to hunker down. So, work in progress. Lila, how did you attach the ruler to your back bar? So it isn't a ruler, it's a plastic measuring tape like a dressmaker's, only the long armors one is super, super long. And they also have a 0 center, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. I don't tend to try and center my quilts, so I just put the tape on with double-sided 3M tape. It's just taped onto my aluminum bar, and it has been there for a couple of years, and it's never budged. So I just put that measuring tape on, and I just look at what's the right measurement and what's the left measurement, and that's all I need to know. Doesn't really matter where, if that makes sense. Kim, silk tulle is not scratchy at all, very fine and looks invisible from a distance. Then I think that would be a fabulous solution. I would love to see some detailed photos, some close-up photos of what that looks like when it's done, because I think that might be a great solution for some really fragile but very precious quilts to salvage them. Yeah. Judy, off subject. Susan, that color looks nice on you. Thank you. It's tricky to find a shirt that does not, like I used to wear much more prints and florals on this show, and then I thought, I've got a quilt behind me, a quilt in front of me, and but today it is plaid. Also, it's flannel. It's starting to feel a little bit like autumn here, just a little bit. So out with the flannel shirts. Okay, are you ready to get quilting? Nope, there's more. There's more. Rashanea, I wish you could tell me how to pronounce your name so I was sure I was getting it right. Anyway, I'm working on tops done by my grandmother's cousin who got me into quilting. So many of them are double knits, very thick and stretchy. I use the cup foot trick. I know exactly what you mean by a double knit and stretchy and thick. Yes, cup foot is your friend. Those seam allowances are brutal. On the bright side, that fabric is also very nudgeable. So hopefully that's working out well for you. Those quilts will never die. I have a few of those too for picnic quilts. Okay, is that it? We're good to go. Okay, on to the border. Let's do our side camera for a sec, and we'll talk about reasonable expectations yet again. I don't know that this really shows on camera, but this border here is one that I didn't replace. And it's not terribly ruffly. It was a little bit more down here, but it's not straight, right? The quilt just was not terribly straight. So this is the one place where my finished product is not going to be perfectly square. It's about a ½ an inch lower on this edge than it is on that edge. However, reasonable expectations, I'm pretty happy with that I kept a 72-inch quilt that was so biasy, stretchy, reasonably square. So that said, what I have done so far is I have stitched around the outer perimeter of this border, and I've stitched in the ditch on the inner side of the border. And as I quilt, you'll see in a couple places I actually caught the border in my edge stitching, like it literally had a jog in it. And so it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So all I'm going to do now is start my stitching on the outside edge. And I'm just going to go up, down, up, down, up, down, creating this piano key border. I have not pre-marked them at all. I'm just using the measurements on my rulers. Mr. Producer's interrupting me. What am I doing? We have another super chat. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you. Bobbin with Brittany. I appreciate you a bunch. So I'm still on my 10 stitches per inch. I've still got my stitch regulator on, and I apologize. The camera's probably going to wobble a fair bit, because I want to go fairly quickly on this so we get done. Here's a good example. See this ruffle of fabric? There's quite a bit of fullness there. What I don't want to do is keep shoving that over with my ruler, or I'm going to end up with pleats. Do you see that? So I'll actually nudge it back that way, put my ruler on and hold it, right? And I'm going to stitch that puff in place. And now I've taken up that extra. So this is what I was saying earlier. Piano key is really good at that, and you would never know that looking at it afterwards. There's quite a bit of extra fabric in that. Can you see that pleat under my ruler? But there will be no pleat in the stitching. Pris loves to take quilts home and wash them and get the crinkly look. So like that will utterly disappear after she has washed it. It will just be part of the crinkle. Okay, bear with me a sec. Ruth just brought me some fresh coffee and I really need to wet my whistle. So thanks for that, Ruth. I appreciate it. I just need a sip. All right. This is kind of a mindless job, so I'll chat while we do this. I have used piano keyboarders on all kinds of projects in all kinds of ways. The one that is behind me, I don't know that I have a good way of showing you a close-up, but that is a quilt, a vintage quilt top also, that I did really early in my long arm quilting career, like maybe in my second year. I bit off, well, it's like climbing Mount Everest is about what I decided to do when I was not an experienced mountain climber, but I sure learned a lot doing that quilt. And in it, I used a piano keyboarder and I put intricate things in kind of every other one and made this beadboard look. I'm just running to the other end because I'm running into my front bar as the quilt gets a little bit longer. So I just need to advance it a tiny touch. So this piano key effect can be used in all kinds of ways. I only ever go about as wide as an inch. I don't love it wider than that. That's just my personal taste. 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch are my most common. But sometimes I'll get more creative and I'll do like a 1/4 inch and then an inch and then a 1/4 inch and then an inch. And sometimes, as in the one behind me, every second one of those big ones, I then did tiny, tiny, tiny little matchsticking in. So you got this really elaborate striped look. So you can be as fussy or as simple as you like. All a matter of how much time you want to spend. And I'm just doing my traveling outside my basting line and then on my stitching in the ditch line. Pretty simple. And I did this by sections as I was advancing the quilt as a whole. When I basted each side edge, I also stitched in the ditch inside this border and did the piano key as I was advancing the quilt. So those sides were, by the time I got to the bottom of the quilt, they were all done. I promise I oiled my machine this morning, but I'm hearing the bobbin rattling just a little bit, which probably means I'm getting close to an empty bobbin. Berninas are kind of comical that way. They talk to us just a little bit when your bobbin is getting nearly empty or when it wants oil. Because it's a metal bobbin, it just rattles a certain specific little sound. Hello, I'm here. I need attention. Kind of funny because my Megamel machines had metal bobbins too, but they never had that particular sound. Here you can see a few of those dark spots, tiny ones. There are spots like that all over this quilt, but I have faith in Retro Soak. I think they will lighten a great deal. The quilt behind me was the first time that I met the product Retro Soak. And I was astonished at how it lightened up the cream as a whole and removed the stains, but also how it brightened up all the prints in that quilt. So when I'm standing talking and you can see my face again and see that quilt behind me, have a look at it. When that quilt top came to me, it was just so dull. And that soak really helped to brighten it up. So I've been a fan ever since. Okay, I'm going to take a second here and show you one of my tricks. I have not pre-marked all these lines just in the interest of saving time. But what I like to do is mark several from the corner And you'll see why in just a moment. Usually 3. And I also will need a 45-degree marking on that border for my little miter. And now as I approach these marked lines, I will be able to determine if I need to spread them out just a touch or squeeze them together just a touch, so as not to have one super fat one or one super skinny one right as I get to the end. Makes sense? I'll be able to just distribute my adjustment. It's actually working out quite nicely. It seems like most of the time you're halfway in between. You just have to decide either bigger or smaller. But either way, it looks much better to distribute that over 3 or 4 spaces than squish it all in one. Another cool feature of the Bernina is that we can flip the handlebars in multiple directions. So if I did not have a camera attached to the left one, I'd be flipping it way up when I'm doing ruler work just to get it out of my way. But it does have a camera attached today, so I apologize if I bump it. I will try not to. I think now I'm going to work from the upper edge down. I just find it easier to hold my ruler that way. There's not very many inches left. Let me just mark a couple of these lines to do exactly what we did before. In terms of spacing, now the prediction has proven true. We've got a half a one. So I'm just going to make every one a bit smaller. And there we are. We're done. Boom. Let me just get my thread cut and I'll show you. Of course, you're still seeing the purple too, but see how even those look? And these 4 are all a little bit smaller, but it's better than having 1/4 inch one at the end, right? So that's the mitering done. Let us go to the other end and take the ruler plate off. The other corner was already done, Mr. Producer, sir. Let me get another sip of coffee, and if we have any questions or comments, let's throw them up. Let me just lift the ruler plate off before you put them on the screen. So again, there is no mechanical reason why you can't just keep stitching with the ruler plate on. I'm struggling here because I am limited space. The reason I take it off is so that I gain back those few inches of mobility at the front of my machine. And I think I'm totally done with ruler work now for this quilt anyways, so the timing is right. Okay, let me get my coffee cup in hand and we will chat a minute. All right. P. Willis, my tape is at the bottom like yours used to be. When I roll to the next area, I don't feel like it's always in line. The quilting pulls it in a bit. You know, it does a little. I think I've done a couple short reels on that. And yes, my tape I used to have sort of suspended over the front edge of my rails too, which I almost preferred in some ways. However, it is what it is. But what you can do, because you're right, quilting the quilt tends to pull it in a little bit. especially at the back edge, right, where your take-up roller is. I literally tug on both ends, and when it's quite severe, as it sometimes is, or it's a bigger quilt, I will grab my take-up roll and just squeeze it and push it out to one side, and squeeze it and push it out toward the other side. And you can gain like a half an inch by doing that. Just squeeze and push, squeeze and push. Works like a charm. It's really helpful. Okay, let's see. Super sticker. The sticker is a Shiba dog clapping his hands. Mr. Producer says, this is why AI will never be able to take over the world, because it's just so darn literal. By the way, I have a soft spot in my heart for Shibas. We had one for, I don't know, 13 or 14 years, and she was the sweetest dog ever. So, fun that you chose a Shiba clapping its hands. Gloria, I'm getting ready to quilt a quilt. The quilter has provided fleece for the batting. Should there be any problems that I might encounter, or do you have any advice to offer? Actually, no, fleece works fairly well for batting because it's in some ways more stable and less stretchy or distortable. So fleece works fine as batting. I have not done it often, but sometimes, and it's been fine. And for backings as well. So either way it works. Debbie, I've learned the importance of getting to know my machine. It has really helped me to become a better quilter. I completely agree, Debbie. Just about a week ago, I released a video on 7 things I wish I'd known when I started quilting. And the bonus sort of prequel was get to know your machine. So when I was talking to a couple of you earlier and I said, one quilt won't make you familiar with the process, it's going to take 10 or 20 or 30. That's kind of what I meant. And when you get a new sewing machine, it's like this too. It's got its little things like either where you reach for the presser foot, or where you put your knee pedal, or how high the presser foot lifts, or how you thread it, or just all these things. You don't really think about them when you know your machine and you're just doing them, and your quilting machine is like that too. And the more you quilt and the more you get to know it and know what the thread should feel like when you're pulling it through the needle or pulling it through the bobbin, all that acquaintance just helps things to go so much more easily and so much more smoothly. I've been in that frustrating new machine phase enough times with enough different machines to know it's hard, but just keep going, get used to it, get to know it, and it does get better. Debbie, you're so right. Michelle, did you say how your quilter's ruler tape was attached? I just used 3M brand double-sided sticky tape. Use whatever brand you like, but that's what I had. I did not try and do it in one long piece because it's super sticky. So I started in the middle of my tape with like a little 2 or 3 inch segment, and then I just did more 2 or 3 inch segments till I worked my tape out flat. And it has never lifted or moved at all. It's lovely. 2-part question. I find it easier to smoosh the fullness around and coax it in without the ruler base in place when free motioning. You are absolutely right, Kim, and you will see that when I work on my red stars, which we're going to do next. We'll see that in action. Okay. Red stars, let's get at it. I'm going to set my coffee way off to the side because I'm a little scared of it. Okay, the ruler plate is off. We're going to change top thread only. So I'm taking my linen 60 weight off, and I'm putting on my red. This is Isocord 40 weight again. So it's the same weight and style as the bobbin exactly. Okay, okay, Mr. Producer says there's a question we might want to answer before we go further. Lila, how wide is too wide for piano keyboarders to look good, and what width is the border on this quilt? The width as a whole is about 3.5 inches finished. My personal opinion is inch wide lines is as wide as I go. However, I have seen quilters do 2-inch spacing, quilters who like very little quilting on their projects. So I have to say that's a matter of personal preference. I feel like the framing effect, to frame more elaborate quilting on the inside, I feel like an inch or 3/4 or half does that really nicely, but that is personal opinion. Lori, 60 weight or 40 weight better for the bobbin? Frankly, either. Either is fine. And I have pre-wound 80 weight bobbins that I actually love because they hold so much thread. Just know that you will probably need to change your bobbin tension if you change that weight of thread, right? A lighter weight thread is finer, and your bobbin will probably need to be a little tighter. But any of those are fine for bobbin threads, bobbin choices. And someone's asking why I went with 60 weight. On the top, you'll see when I get to the fill that we're going to do in the cream-colored muslin areas, it's quite closely spaced. My original thought was that I was going to be doing kind of a mashup of designs, kind of, I call them snow pea, kind of S shapes with bubbles and things. And so thinking of doing bubbles, I thought there's going to be some overstitching. The lighter, finer thread, the better that looks. You don't get that thready, thick, embroidered look. You just get the texture. As you'll see when we get to it, that's not the design I'm quilting now, but I had already started with the 60 weight thread, and I'm happy with how it ended up. Carrie, are you changing thread because it's just a 2-color quilt? Correct. This was Pris, to whom the quilt belongs. This was her choice, and we discussed this at some length because I don't love having different threads top and bottom, but Pris particularly wanted red in the stars on the top, and she particularly did not care for having red something something on the back, on the bottom. So I was clear about the expectation that probably the red stitching is going to show through a little bit through all the needle holes on the back, and in fact it does, and Pris was good with that. So we have lovely red stitching on the front, we have tan on the back with a little bit of red showing through. That's just the reality of it. Okay, is that it? Okay. Here we go. We're going to mark our stars. I'll do one close to the, yeah, you can see it there. I'm gonna back this up so it's a little bit closer to me because there's no point in quilting at arm's length now that I've got my ruler foot off. You probably could zoom in a little and I'll show you guys my marking. Oh, drop my chalk. What I'm quilting in these stars, again, this was Pris's preference. We discussed this a little bit. What things shall we quilt into it? She didn't want it super, super fussy. So I can't even remember what I initially showed her. Probably some type of swirl out into the star points. And Pris said, can you do anything with hearts? So this is what we came up with. And I think I mentioned this in my description. Mr. Producer was instrumental in this one because I was trying to find, number one, a way that I could complete the whole thing without having to stop and start, right? So in one thread pass. But number two, I don't want a whole lot of lines of quilting converging on this center point. That can really make it buckle and just not be very attractive. And it's difficult to quilt and have them land in the same place when it's free motion, all of those things. So you'll get to see what we're quilting in a second. It is hearts. But first I do this simple marking. So I'm going to quickly do that on all of the stars. Because it gives me kind of a framework for this design that I'm going to quilt. It is going to be free motion. And by the way, I got online and I hunted like crazy for something with stars that would fit in a block that I could do with my digitized system, right? Because I have one. I could not find anything. So I think Mr. Producer might take that on as his next project. Try and digitize this one. Oops, that first line was not in the middle at all. And this is just a guideline, so I'm not hyper particular. In some cases, I'm not right in the middle of these points either. I'm just trying to get them all crossing at the same point in the middle as best I can. And I'm using a marker by Clover. It's a little tiny chalk wheel. It's loose chalk and a little tiny wheel. Gives me a very fine line. And I quite like that. There's still lots of chalk in there. I'm not getting any marking on this one. There we go. Now it's got about 3 lines. Well, I have a guideline. That's what really matters. It doesn't really matter which one we start with now because remember we've faux basted our quilt, right? So every star is fixed. Fabric is not shifting anywhere. So I am going to go ahead and start on one side and you're going to see a close-up camera. So I'm going to stitch the one on which I have, let's do one with better chalk lines for the first one. So here's the bit that Mr. Producer came up with. Notice how I am not starting in the middle. I'm going to quilt the whole first heart shape without ever going to the center of my little cross lines. I'm going to stop and cut that tail off. We're going to make a quilter out of Mr. Producer yet. I keep threatening that. So each pair of these is going to become a heart, and I'm doing them purposely not symmetrical, chiefly because it's almost possible to get them perfectly symmetrical. So if I just don't shoot for that, we're better off. And now you notice that I am, in this second pass, in this second level of detail, going right into the center. And again, I'm really emphasizing the non-symmetrical. I'm getting this handy little swirl on one side only. And I'm going fairly slowly because I'm trying to, there's touch points that I touch as I'm quilting. One of them was here to close that heart up. Of course, another is in the center, and another was for my swirls to catch this middle point of the heart. So I'm going to show you that so you can see what we did. I'm quite proud of that, actually. Can we see that fairly well? There we go. So Pris and I were happy with that. It's not too fussy. Its ruler work didn't really fit the bill for this star because it's so, some of them particularly, are so inaccurate, right? To try and do, you know, blades out into each point or a square on the inside, it wouldn't be square. The things would not be alike. So having this more whimsical look seemed like the perfect answer. Now, because I don't know that there's really seriously any hope of us actually getting that thing digitized, here's what I'm doing instead. In my advanced membership, there's going to be new lessons coming out on the 1st of September. There's 2 new lessons on the 1st of every month. And I'm going to include a detailed, like a drawing first, an animated drawing of me doing this design, and then how I marked and how I laid it out and where I start and through the process with my voice talking you through it. That's the kind of thing that I teach in my advanced membership. So if you're looking for some quilting motifs like this with detailed instructions of how to get through them, or if you're looking for things like case studies, I have not done one for this specific quilt, but I have for other vintage quilts and custom quilting projects, just walking you through how I think through the design choices, what order I quilt in, why I choose certain things. There's lots of case studies in that program too. So a few of you have been doing super chats, which I totally appreciate, but another way to support us is by joining that monthly subscription membership. Now, like I said, it is a regular monthly charge then, but you do get free lessons, and that's the type of content where you do get continuing lessons. That's the word I want. That's the type of content we have, is a little more custom. Sometimes it is fresh edge-to-edge designs as I devise new ones that are not in my initial class teaching them, those sorts of things. And if I just nudge this fabric, I can get that all to ease in, maybe. We did it. So the idea of marking that 8-pointed cross just helps me to keep it organized, right? It is still free motion quilting. No two are absolutely positively identical, but they're similar, right? So just having those organized wedges, and also I'm using the little seam line. You'll see my first heart, my first side, I go just beyond that seam line, and the second side I go quite a bit beyond it. That's kind of how I work out in my mind how far to go and how I keep it, you know, semi-uniform. So here we go on the first one, just out beyond that seam line. Let me turn my thread. And then I'm going to stop talking, and you'll just have to figure it out by watching, because I can't talk and quilt at the same time when I'm doing these. One more thing to show you. Side camera, Dave, if we could. I have here 2 trusty vegetable cans. Disgusting canned vegetables, but very useful for quilting. Here's why. This red star has quite a bit of extra material in the middle. And the best way to deal with that is to stretch it over the nose of the long arm. And I think it was Kim that mentioned earlier, this type of zhuzhing works better when you don't have the ruler table on. That's true, because I've got this skinny little nose under here, and literally by putting this weight on both sides, it stretches all the fabric a little bit, but evenly. And so now when I quilt it, and then I take the cans off, it will all evenly go back in. And it's really helping me to not get pleats. So can't overestimate the value of these. I'm putting them this way so they won't roll away from me. Sometimes I put them this way if I was quilting like a long line and they would just roll ahead of me. So you can choose which way is useful for you at the moment. It's really a cool technique, actually. Success! Water bottles also work well. They're a nice, not so much weight that it'll stretch your quilt, but enough weight to just get lots of stuff eased in that you need to ease in. I imagine Dave by now has put in the link for Advance into the chat, but in case he's not gotten to that, I do always have it in every YouTube episode too. It's usually under additional opportunities for learning. It is definitely a place where I share quite a lot of what my current projects are, because so often I'll be working on something and I'll think, oh, this would be interesting, you know, for students to see, and so then I'll film what I'm doing and create a case study from it, and so that's how I tend to share a lot of my sort of regular work. Two more. How are we doing for time, Mr. Producer? Wow, we're at 1:40 already. Look at us go. Well, after this, we will get into the background fill, and that's the last kind of large element, so that will be good. And you can see how slow I actually stitch when I really want to be in control of where my needle lands. That's how slow I go. There's a bit of a fine line there. If you go super, super slowly, like one stitch at a time, you can't get smooth curves. So find your own happy place. But for me, that's it. When I want to land these swirls and cross over a line just at exactly a point, I have to go slow enough to be able to do it. And I also look ahead of where my needle is stitching. I look where I want to go, where I want to land or arrive. Pull my cans in a bit closer. That's a tricky one. Okay, that was our last star. We're done with the vegetable cans. Any more comments, Dave, while I change threads again? And by the way, a super easy way to get that white chalk off is with a slightly dampened piece of batting. Brush it off. Sometimes just a soft brush, honestly, is enough, but dampness is sometimes required to get it all. So I'm putting my 60 weight linen colored thread back on. Let me just get my threading done and then I'll come and we'll chat for a minute. And we're also going to be rolling the quilt back. Let me get my coffee. I need another sip because the next job is going to take some concentration. All right. Mr. Producer's just lining up some comments. I'll undo the machine while he does that. Ruth is chuckling. There must be a good conversation happening. Okay. Camera view. Della is asking, does Mr. Producer and Ruth quilt? Well, Mr. Producer helps to design ideas, and that's a fact, and Ruth is not a quilter. Haha, no. Made one square for a friendship quilt. That's as close as I get. That's true. He has pieced one square. Oh, see? Ruth says I have before, but I've yet to make it a habit. Okay, I did not know that. That's cool. Will we see more of you two soon? You know, maybe. I'm working on it. Mr. Producer's very camera shy. Okay, those of you who've been around for a while just know that's not true. Pretty funny, though. Okay. When do you mark the quilt loaded versus prior to being loaded? Oh, gosh. That's a good question, Betsy. The only quilt that comes to mind that I've marked before I loaded was a few years back. I was doing a vintage quilt. Her name was Ava, if any of you saw that story or remember it. Ava was a series of vintage blocks, and I only had a few, so I placed them kind of diagonally in a swath across a solid kind of iris-colored, clematis-colored background. And I wanted to emphasize that diagonal shape, and so my quilting was actually in wide diagonal swaths. So before I loaded the quilt on the long arm, I drew some diagonal lines across the whole quilt, like every, 8 or 12 inches. I didn't necessarily ever actually quilt those, but they gave me guidelines when I was looking at my quilt. When I'm looking at small spaces on my quilt frame, I was like, okay, there's my angle, and it's the same angle as my pieced blocks, even when they weren't always in view. Make sense? So I think that's the only quilt that I personally have marked before I load. There are other quilters that do most of their marking before they load, so it's not a right wrong. It's a preference. It has to do with how much quilting, how detailed, how important it is to see the quilt as a whole, that sort of thing. A few times I've done things like when I've got a lot of negative space, I'll kind of, while the whole quilt is still out flat, I'll kind of say, okay, here's an area to do a fill, here's an area to do a, big motif, right? So I can see the balance of the whole thing, but then the details of it all happen on the frame. That's just my style. Okay, here we go. Angel, I like how you chose to divide and conquer this quilt. It helps to see there's more than one way to problem solve, and absolutely true. Sabita, I love your ideas on how and why to quilt a certain design. I learn a lot from just watching you. Thanks for these live videos. You're welcome. You're welcome. Debbie, I struggle with bump back feathers. I've tried slowing down, but I can't stay on my previous stitching. Any tips? I don't know if I have a great tip for that, Debbie. I'll tell you a personal story, though. Really early in my long arm quilting, I met, now her name is going to escape me. Her first name is Kim. Some of you might know her. And she's known for her intricate, gorgeous bump back feathers. And she came to Spokane and she spoke at the Machine Quilters Guild that I was a member of. And so she showed these elaborate, wonderful quilted feathers. And I'm sure my eyes were this big because I thought, I'll never be able to quilt that. Like, I couldn't hope to quilt a feather and trace back over as beautifully as she did. Time goes by, hundreds of quilts go by, I find that I can. So I think probably my biggest tip for you, Debbie, is just keep trying. Other things might be less finicky than feathers, like maybe when you're quilting bubbles or you're quilting loops and you practice those shorter, smaller, less intensive quilting back over a previous line. And gradually you just get better and better and better at controlling the machine. And some machines do control more easily than others. I've been fortunate. All of mine have done well. I've had 2 Gamels and now my Bernina. And they're all, and particularly the Bernina, feels light. It's easy to control. And I love that. But really, I think it's just exposure and practice and doing it lots. Aren't you happy with that answer? Okay, back to quilting. Let me set the coffee aside. So once again, today I've been talking about my advanced membership, in which I often quilt or show the behind the scenes of projects such as this one, kind of either the step-by-step of how I design them, or the order in which I quilt them, or my decisions like thread and motifs, and I call those case studies. Or they can be quilts that have interesting, features about them. So that's one of the things I have in my membership. Another is specific motifs, like the one in these red stars, walking you through them step by step. Another is edge-to-edge free motion quilting designs, which is my first love. And I have a huge course that teaches a bunch of them, but whenever I have new designs that I want to show, that's where they end up, is in advance. So that monthly membership, I think, is worth its weight in gold. Any member receives access to all of the content that has ever been recorded. Could I tell you how many videos there are? About 100 in there now, lessons in there now. And some of them are guest teachers as well. Lisa Kaye, Sue Hines, Sam Alberts, teachers like that. So lots of good value in there. Okay, we are now going to get into the stitching in between these blocks. Did you get a chance to see, maybe Dave, you could just turn the close-up camera on and I'll show what I am in fact doing. Look at this. It's a meander. Now, I have had a wee bit of a love-hate relationship with meander, because it kind of gets a bad rap for being, I don't know, just a kind of cop-out when you can't think of what else to quilt and you just sort of clap a meander on a quilt. However, I love it as a backfill when it's tiny like this. And so a couple of the reasons Pris and I chose it. Number one, it makes gorgeous crinkly texture. Let's do our face on camera for a second because I brought a show and tell. Check this out. Can you, yeah, you can see it if I move it around a little bit. Oh, you got the greasy spot there. It's a table runner. Okay, let me show you the better end. Can you see that texture? of that meandering and how crinkly and lovely it gets when it's washed. And keep in mind, Pris's purpose for this red and white quilt is a cozy couch quilt. So it's going to give her lovely texture. So our initial thought of doing this a little bit fancier, a little more formal, kind of mashup of a floral and a swoop and bubbles all mashed up together kind of broke down when I got right to the quilt and I got all these stars stitched in place, and then I looked at the amount of cream colored fabric in some of those areas that need taking in, and I quailed at the thought of doing that. There's just too much. So this was a really good solution. There is something about quilting a design that does not cross over itself that takes up maximum fabric. So I often talk about using something curvy and often loopy. That works well, but even better, especially small scale, is a meander. So because it does not ever cross over itself when you're never pushing a pleat, right? You're just literally pushing fullness in all those curved bits. So that's what we're doing in the center of these blocks. Now I think, do you ever use the cans to help with fullness when using a digital E2E? That's a good question, Susan. I think they would be a good choice. I personally don't, because when I have a quilt that I see, in my initial assessment has got a lot of fullness or a wonky border or something massive to deal with, I choose to do it freehand and not digital because I feel like I can manage it a ton better when I'm in charge of the machine. So that's always the way I go, is I just go with a freehand design so that I can manage it. Okay, for my meander right now, I have put my little darning foot back on, which is just a tiny little foot that's got really good visibility. And I'm going to start over on this right hand side because this is where the really wonky one is that I want to show you. And then we probably won't go super long because it is a bit like watching grass grow to see someone doing meander. So I'm just going to anchor that thread. Oh, okay. Ruth's going to try and man the little side held camera. You might have to do it from the other side because you're going to get this big one. I'm not sure how that'll work, but I leave you to try it. We'll let Ruth do that. She's doing a roving camera. Okay, a couple things that I'm going to do differently. I mentioned earlier, I typically have been stitching at 10 stitches per inch. That's what all this ruler work is and what the hearts were. But I'm actually going to put my machine on manual mode, and I'm going to end up with stitches that are more like 12 per inch. Because my meander is so tiny, 10 stitches per inch gets almost corners on some of those little meanders. I much prefer to do it in manual mode, so that's what you're going to get to see. And I've got my machine set at 740 right now. Here we go. And this is when you absolutely could benefit by a great podcast or Audible book, because this is kind of mindless work. Other than when you have a lot of wonkiness, and you need both hands and a little bit of concentration. But in terms of the design itself, pretty straightforward. I'm pausing for just a second because I need my quilt to be just a touch forward. What I'm doing is I'm catching the areas in this pass that are between the stars, and then on my next pass I'll be able to come right up next to it. Whoops, and I forgot to do that because I was busy talking to you about it. There we go. Now I'll be able to catch that very easily on my next pass. Meandering is a funny thing. Everybody's looks a little bit differently. I always think mine looks kind of like dog bones. Okay, I've got another one for you. can you see right here? Can we see this on camera? Yes, you can. There's a lovely red thread under here. It's probably still attached to that seam allowance. Yep, it's probably attached to this seam allowance, but I'm going to see if I can get it out. So I've got a needle. It's by Dritz, I believe, and it's called a snag nabbit. There's no eye, but there's a rough end to it. So I'm going to go under my top layer and under that red thread, and then I'm going to pull my needle back, trying to work around the camera here, until I'm right under the red thread, hopefully. And I will carefully, no, I think I overshot it. I did. I will carefully pull that needle through. Let's try it again. Make sure we have the red. It's hard to see. Let's give this a try. This is one that I can't like practice beforehand. There it is. I got it. See that? There's my little red thread. Pull it out. It is still attached to the seam allowance, but we're going to get as much of it out as we can. Great. Now we're left with a little tuft of batting. So we'll just put the needle in again, different hole, and sweep across, fingernails across the little spreads of threads, and presto. Isn't that slick? That's how you get a dark colored thread out. Okay, now where were we going? Rerouting. This next square here is the one that has a lot of fullness in it. Like I said, you're welcome to take wagers on whether I can actually get it. Can you see all this? There's a solid inch in about an 8-inch square to be taken in. So we're going to try. A couple of things I'm going to do is work in small areas, but also you'll see that I kind of do my edges first and corral it, as opposed to working across toward an edge and pushing it in front of me. So you'll kind of see that, and I'll kind of do quilting with my one hand as well and nudging with the other, especially as I get into the fuller areas. At the edges here, it's not too bad. Right here, I'm matching up with what I did before, bumping right up next to it. And now I'm just quite deliberately with my nails pushing that excess fabric to catch it with those little, the curving shapes. Pull it in, pull it in, pull it in. And sometimes if it's really severe, I'll slow down my machine just a little bit, gives me a little more reaction time. So far I'm doing okay. We're going to go over here and get this little square in the bottom before I forget him. And I will say I am working pretty darn close to a bobbing needle here, so if you're not confident of where your fingers are and so forth, then maybe consider leaving your bigger hopper foot on so there's a bigger barrier there. I would not want to be the person that steers you toward stitching over your fingers, gosh knows. Oh boy, I came awfully close to a pleat there. There's quite a pinch at any rate. Okay, we're going to slow down, way down, and try to see if we can get that divided and conquered a little bit. Maybe not. There might be a pleat there. Look at that. Oh my goodness sakes. I can't even get it to move. It's like it's stuck to the batting under there. We're at the edge. How do you think I did? It's a little bit iffy in spots, but not too bad. I'm pleased. I'm fairly pleased. Let's find our 750 again. There we go. Okay. Whew. Back up to speed. I'll just do a little bit more, give you a chance to ask any last questions or make any comments that you have. And then that'll probably be it for today's show. So as always, and I haven't said this very often throughout, but as always, this is absolutely live and unscripted. We are streaming in real time. There are no edits. So what you see is how long it takes, how I make decisions on the fly, slow down my quilting on the fly, deal with things on the fly. So if you have enjoyed this show, I would absolutely love a thumbs up and a subscribe. If you want to know when shows are being aired and what the topics are, I encourage you to sign up for my newsletter. There's a link for that in the description as well. I generally send out an email a day or two before every one of these live episodes with a photo of what I'll be working on and some of the expected topics. And then in between, I send newsletters that tend to be often stories, frequently tips. That's just kind of how I roll, but quilty type stuff. So I welcome you to sign up for that, and I sure appreciate you being here today. It has been several weeks, I think 6, since we did our last live stream, and it feels like half of forever. So I have thoroughly enjoyed this today. I hope you have too. I have said probably 1,000 times, and I'm sure I'll say it 1,000 more. When I was first machine quilting, I would have practically given my eye teeth to be able to just see what someone did and how they did it. Like, how do you actually change thread colors in the middle? Like, do you have to do all of one thread color first, or can you go back and forth? Or like, how do you do this stuff? How do you make those decisions? Well, that's what I hope this answers for you. It lets you just see how I do things. It's not the only way. Sometimes it's not even the right way. Sometimes you guys give me tips and advice. However, it's just that inside look, that unscripted look into quilting work in my studio. And it is my pleasure to share that with you. A hair on there. This one has some fullness too, not quite as severe as the last one. If you want to see pictures of the full quilt finished, come back in a day or two. I will take some photos and post them. what are they called now, Dave, in YouTube? Community posts, I think. And I can share photos there so you can have a look at a bigger area and the whole thing all together. I'm getting quite excited now about seeing it finished. I'm pleased with the results. I would think I'm soon going to be running out of bobbin thread. Usually I have a pretty good sense of when that's happening. Let's see how right I am today. Harder to judge when you're doing ruler work because it's not as much volume of quilting, you know? But we'll see how good my instincts are. I think I'll finish this little tiny block and then we'll call it for today. And just because we want to know, we're going to pull the bobbin out and just see where it's at. And I'll just stop in a quilting line there. And that'll be it for today, folks. I will pan very slowly. Oh, you're off the close-up. If you put the close-up on, I'll pan very slowly over this and you can... Oh, here comes Ruth with the roving camera. So we can see it. We're just going to go from here. I'll hold it if you like. Are we on? Ooh, we are. Let's see how steady Susan can be. I'm going to back up a little bit so you can kind of see the effect. I'm pleased. I like that the red stars have less quilting, a little puffier. They're the statement pieces. You can see how the double ruler work kind of accents them, sets them off, frames them, and then that stippling. And once this quilt gets washed, number one, the stains will be gone. But number two, it's all going to turn so cuddly and scrunchy and get that old-fashioned texture. Okay, Dave. Perfect. Okay. Okay, let's have a peek at the bobbin. Inquiring minds really, really want to know. Let's just see. I'm going to laugh at myself if there's still 40 yards on there. Ah, there is still a little bit. Main camera. Yeah, there's still a fair bit. I was wrong. So, we'll blame it on the ruler work. Hard to judge, right? Okay, any comments or questions before we go? All right. Maggie, is the advanced class recorded or set at a specific time? They are all pre-recorded, Maggie, so that you can access them at your leisure. And they don't ever go away or expire. And so as long as you're a paid-up subscriber, you have access to all of them. Watch as many times as you want. Press rewind or pause as many times as you want. Kim, my meander looks like Snoopy heads with the occasional Italy thrown in. I mean, don't ours all. But again, the beauty of it is, you just see the texture. You really do. That's an overused quilting phrase, but it's true. Kim's also asking, do you ever starch or steam the very full spots to shrink the fullness? Your Laura Star iron would do a fabulous job right at the frame. I have a couple times, Kim. I've not found it to do a vast percentage of change. I've not. I have at times experimented with starching. I think I like steam better than starch because the starch, like this would be an aerosol spray starch, while it does pull it in a little bit, it also dries a bit stiffer. So I feel like that pull in is counteracted by, now it's harder to deal with when I'm trying to scrunch it with my fingers. You're right, my Laura Star iron is probably a good choice, and maybe when we get off air, because I still have quite a few squares left, maybe I'll try that. It involves moving it and, shifting. I don't have much room here behind the machine to be doing it on camera, but I think I'll give it a try. Because you're right, the Laura Star has a ton of steam and it's very fine, and that might be just the perfect thing. Susan Berry, do you always meander so small, or is it because it's a vintage quilt? I do not always meander so small, although typically I meander fairly small. because I use it as a background fill more than an all-over design. I don't personally care for it as an all-over design. I like the crinkly little texture that it gives when it's a fill and it gets washed and crinkly. Sue Donnelly, great music, watching meandering might cure insomnia. You know, it probably would. It probably would. And what do they call ASMR, right? The types of videos that you're listening that are just very sort of sensory and audible, that it would be very good for that. Betsy, so appreciate you not increasing the filming speed as so many other quilters do. I get motion sickness watching, and I do not get motion sickness under ordinary circumstances. You know, it's a funny thing, Betsy, because I posted a reel yesterday of quilting one of these hearts, and I did speed it up. I think I did it at 3 times the speed. It's this balancing act between you're trying to show something, you know, a couple minutes long, and no one's going to sit and watch it for that length of time, or few are. And so you speed it up so you get to show the whole thing in a short pace of time. But I know what you're saying. It is really helpful to see the thing done in real time. So I'm glad it helps with your motion sickness too. Diana, steam and unwashed red fabric might equal bleeding. Actually, good point. I'll maybe try it. I don't know where I could try it unobtrusively because I don't have any red scraps. Good point. I might think twice now before I do that. See, this is why we have a community. We all think of the different things, right? Okay, any more? Couple more. Sabrina, awesome live as usual. Learned so much. Thank you, team. You all work so well together to give us a meaningful viewing. We try. We try. Carrie Quilts, I like these lives because they remind me that I don't need to rush. Yes, that is another advantage of seeing a thing done in real time, is you get a better sense of how long things take. Feathers are not magical. They don't happen in 30 seconds usually, nor do hearts like this. All right, you guys, it's been fun. I'm going to keep quilting now. And, well, first I'm going to take a little break for the neck and shoulders, but I'm going to keep quilting today. And with luck, I'll get this one totally finished and be able to post some pictures very shortly. So watch in the posts tab for those. Thank you so much for joining me again. Like and subscribe if you have enjoyed it, and join my newsletter if you want further quilting tips and stories and notifications when these lives are coming your way. Have a great day, whatever's left of it for you, and I will catch up with you again soon.